Thank you for joining us on day 8 of our 11 Days of Global Unity campaign. Today's theme is human rights, and this is a presentation on how to be an ally to transgender and non-binary identities. And we'll go over some different terms, questions, and definitions, and then we'll get to a section about how people in the community define their gender identities. So I want to start with a quick content warning. This presentation includes talk of genitals by name. At some parts in the term genitalia is used often. These terms are important to be able to fully discuss this topic. So we'll start off with some important terms that you'll commonly hear when talking about the trans and non-binary world and gender in general. So cisgender is to identify with the gender you were assigned at birth, meaning when you were born, the doctor told your parents that you were male, and to this day, you still identify as male. Transgender is to identify with the gender that is not the gender you were assigned at birth, meaning someone might have been assigned male at birth, and now they identify as female, genderqueer, as a trans woman, etc. Non-binary is any gender that is not male or female. Male and female is considered binary genders. An important note is, by definition, technically non-binary folk fit the transgender definition, but not all non-binary folk identify as transgender. And this is an individual choice and up to the individual if they feel as though the term and identity transgender is about them. Some important terms that cause confusion: gender identity versus gender expression. Throughout this presentation, we're going to use a fictional character named Felix as examples to better understand concepts. So gender identity is how an individual identifies, whether it be female, male, non-binary, etc. Felix identifies as a gender, and we'll get to what a gender is in a little bit. Gender expression, on the other hand, is the external manifestation of a person's gender identity, and these don't need to align with societal gender roles. So Felix expresses himself in a feminine way. An important note is, like I said, these don't need to fit societal norms. So someone may be a trans binary man, but present in a feminine manner, but this does not mean they aren't a man just because they aren't presenting masculine. So this little picture goes over some different types of gender expression. Androgynous, individuals who express themselves in a combination of masculine and feminine characteristics. So they might be wearing makeup, which is in a societal norm feminine, but they might be wearing clothing from the men's section. So that would be combining the two. Feminine is the qualities or appearances that are traditionally associated with women. Gender neutral, individuals whose gender expression is different from conventional expectations of masculinity and femininity. Within the community, sometimes gender neutral and androgynous are used interchangeably. And then masculine is a person whose qualities or appearances are traditionally associated with men. A good note here is when we speak about traditionally associated with a gender or societal norms, these can be different in different cultures and different countries. So we're talking about whatever is traditionally or societal norm within the person's specific culture or country. Sex versus gender. I think a lot of people know this is a hot topic when it comes to people arguing that transgender and non-binary people don't exist. So there is a difference. Sex is the biological differences designated at birth as either male or female based on genitalia, genetics, or hormones. The trans and non-binary community usually refer to their assigned sex at birth as AFAB, meaning assigned female at birth, or AMAB, assigned male at birth. So for myself, I talk about myself as being AFAB when I talk within the community. It's just a shorter term instead of having to say that you're assigned female at birth every time. And then when people think genetics and whatnot, they think chromosomes. There are different chromosomes outside of XX and XY also. So female and male aren't the only ones that exist. Gender, on the other hand, is the individual's concept of themselves. Our friend Felix is AFAB, assigned female at birth, but is agender. And sex does not equal gender. Like I said before, someone may have been born male and still identify as male, but someone might have been born male and they identify as female. So when you think of trans sometimes, and trans is just a shorter term for transgender, that a lot of people within the community will say. And so a lot of people think of transitioning. That's usually some of the things that people know about transgender and non-binary folk. So there are two different types of transitioning, medically transitioning and socially transitioning. So we'll start with medically transitioning. In order to feel more like the gender the person identifies with, they might go through medical transition. Important to note is that not all trans or non-binary people go through a transition. Some types of medical transition includes hormone replacement therapy, commonly called HRT, which is testosterone or estrogen, top surgery. So top surgery, and then you'll see next the bottom surgery do have their medical terms like mastectomy. But in the community, we just call it top surgery and bottom surgery. So top surgery would be an assigned female at birth person having their breast removed, while an assigned male at birth person may get breast implants. Bottom surgery, on the other hand, an assigned female at birth person may have surgery to have a penis, while an assigned male at birth person may have a surgery to have a vagina. I know more of the trans masculine and trans man side on these things. So with testosterone, they come in most commonly injections in the United States. A person will inject testosterone once a week. The usual dosage, starting dose is around 50 milligrams a week. So you do 200 milligrams a month. I know in the UK, and I'm not sure in the rest of Europe, you actually get a shot only every 3 months. Another method is gel. A common brand is called androgel, and you'll rub it on your shoulders and your back and sometimes your stomach. And then there's also patches. And then estrogen, it's the method that I know of most is this sort of the same as someone taking birth control. It's in a pill form. Again, I know more about the trans masculine and trans man side, so I'll talk about that more. For top surgery, I'll talk in a second about how social transitioning usually happens first because of cost. So an assigned female birth person might want to have their breast removed so that they can have a flatter chest. So like I said, people just call this top within the community. So they'll say, I had top last month, and it can be quite expensive. It can range from, without insurance, from $3,000 to about $15,000 in the United States. And on the assigned male at birth side, getting breast implants, I've heard that some insurances won't cover this because when you go on estrogen, your breasts can grow naturally. So unless some insurances, they won't do it unless the breast growth does not match the rest of the person's body. So a theme here is insurances it can be very difficult, even with insurance, to be able to transition medically due to a lot of barriers that the insurance companies put on you. So for bottom surgery on the assigned female birth side, there's usually two common things. There's a metoidioplasty and a phalloplasty. When a person goes on testosterone, there's a thing called bottom growth, which is where the clitoris grows in size, usually about 1 inch. And this happens quite quickly on testosterone. So with a metoidioplasty, they use the bottom growth that is already there. But with phalloplasty, they take a skin graft, most commonly from your forearm or your upper thigh. Some surgeons do it from the stomach to be able to create the penis. And this is usually multiple surgeries for both the metoidioplasty and the phalloplasty. It can be, I think, up to 4 surgeries, sometimes more. Socially transitioning, like I said, is usually where people start their transition. Medical transition can take a long time due to wait list, finances, etc. For places that have things like the NHS, I know people can wait up to 2 years just to get a consultation to start HRT or for top surgery. So some ways people socially transition is to change their name. Trans and non-binary folk will refer to their name given at birth as their dead name or their birth name. Most commonly, it's said as their dead name because a lot of people have negative experiences and connotations with the name they were given at birth. But some people, I have friends who just say that was their birth name because there's no connotation, but that name just doesn't suit them anymore. So they might also change their pronouns. The person might start going by he, him, he, they, she, her, they, them, she, they, it, its, etc. And I'll get to a bit neopronouns. For those who go by he, they, or she, they, or 2 or multiple pronouns, it's important to use all pronouns that they list as their pronouns. And so you shouldn't really default to the binary all the time. There's a reason that they have both pronouns there. It's so that both get used. And another way someone might socially transition is to change their gender expression. Someone who's assigned female at birth might start presenting more masculine with a masculine haircut, using a binder to flatten their chest. A binder, the easiest way to describe it is a bit like a super duper sports bra. It binds so that the chest is much flatter than it would be with the sports bra. You definitely have to be careful with it. You're not supposed to wear it more than 8 hours a day. You're not supposed to sleep in it. And misusing it can cause issues for the future. You can possibly not be able to get top surgery, and you can damage your ribs. An assigned female birth person might also use a packer, which is a fake penis. It's just silicone and something they can put in packing underwear, which can be a jock strap or a harness to make them feel better and so that they can seem like they have a penis. And it can be very euphoric for them. Getting voice lessons to help deepen their voice. People might do this before they're able to start testosterone or estrogen so that they can start learning how to naturally have a deeper or higher voice. Pronouns. This is definitely something people in the community, other people in the LGBTQ+ community, and the allies struggle with. So I'm going to go over some commonly asked questions about pronouns. What if I don't know someone's pronouns? You can start by sharing your pronouns. You can say, hi, I'm so-and-so, and my pronouns are this. And then you can ask how to address them. This is helpful in a group, so you're not singling anyone out, and you don't accidentally out them as trans or non-binary. What do you do if you use the wrong pronouns? Just apologize, correct yourself, and move on. Don't profusely apologize or make a scene out of it. This can be extremely awkward for the person you're apologizing to. And this makes it look like they might have to console you and that you're the one who's struggling in the moment, when in reality it's them who are struggling because they were just misgendered again. So an example of this, you're talking about our friend Felix. You say, Felix was there yesterday. He had a really good time. Do I correct someone for using the wrong pronouns for someone? The rule of thumb is, or a good rule of thumb that I suggest is, unless you've been given prior approval to step in and do this, don't. This can be embarrassing and awkward for some. Some people might be out to you and the rest of their friends, but not out in the general public or out to their family. So if you correct them, you could be accidentally outing them, and they're not ready to take that step. So something you can do if they are out and you know they're out, but someone's using the wrong pronouns, instead of saying, hey, you're supposed to use this for this person, you can simply just use correct pronouns in your speech. So an example here is person one, she's great, we have class together. And you can say, oh, you have class with Felix? You're right, he is really great. And then what if I can't ask someone's their pronouns, which can happen a lot because just time doesn't allow it, or you're just in a situation that does not allow this. The best bet is to default to they, them when you don't know someone's pronouns, or you can simply just use their name in place of pronouns. This, I've heard from some friends that they start using people's names in place of pronouns in other languages because thankfully in English we have the ability to use they, them in a singular sense, but in most other languages this isn't a concept that exists yet. So people are starting to try to use people's name in place of pronouns so that they don't have to use those binary pronouns for them. So like I mentioned earlier, there's neopronouns. This is still new to me. I don't know a ton about it, but I wanted to make sure to introduce it. Neopronouns are newer gender-neutral pronouns typically created in the 20th century, but not all of them, as some of these date back to the 1800s. You can see that they is on this chart. It's not a neopronoun, but it's in this chart just as an example for how to use other neopronouns. So a common one I know is down here for Z. It's one I have heard before. I honestly haven't heard a lot of these in the queer communities I'm in, but they are used. So instead of using they, you would use Z. So Z laughed. I called Zur. Zur eyes gleam. That is Zurs. Z likes Zurself. And for this, I've gotten the question of how do you pronounce these neopronouns? Google it. I don't know how to pronounce all of them. There's way more out there than that are on this list, and a lot of lists you'll look at will have multiple different ones. I think trying to Google it is the best. If you have an ally in your life that is farther ahead on the research journey and might know, you can ask them. And if you have to, you could always ask the person like, hey, I'm really interested in knowing how I can correctly pronounce your pronouns. Could you pronounce them for me? And then you can write it down phonetically or whatever you need so you can try to remember and practice it. Honorifics. So honorifics are commonly used on your mail when you're filling out paperwork. The most commonly used gender-neutral honorific is MX, and it's pronounced mix. I have not seen this really used in the real world very widely or within the community that much, but I'm hoping it starts to grow more. And it's a new concept to people within the community too. So we're all learning about a lot of these new things together, people in the community and allies. Some things allies should know is gender is complex. It's going to take time and research to understand more fully. Like I was saying, people within the community, even transgender, non-binary folk are still learning these things. People who are questioning their gender are starting from where you are, Googling what all these things mean. You're going to make mistakes. It's inevitable. It's just something you have to accept that is going to happen. If you make a mistake, apologize and ask for guidance. Like I was saying before, you should go to a person who is farther along on the journey of being an ally for your questions if you can. You can ask a person if they're your friend or family member, and they might teach you themselves, or if they give you resources to go to instead, thank them for those resources. It can be very exhausting to have to repeatedly tell these concepts to people over and over again. And it's not the trans non-binary community's job to teach the cisgender world everything about gender. Everyone knows how to Google nowadays. You can Google these questions. It's just a lot of stress, and it can be a burden on people to constantly have to tell the world about themselves and those around them. So when you do ask questions, ask in a way to allow the person to decide whether or not they want to answer. Some examples are, Would it be okay if I asked you about X topic sometime? Or you can do it so that they don't have to say yes or no, since it can be a bit awkward to say no to people. You can say, hey, I have a question about X topic, but if you don't want to talk about it, we could talk about that new cool action movie coming out soon. That way, if they don't want to talk about it, they don't have to say no. They can just start talking about the action movie, and you can move on from the conversation from there. What question should I avoid? Don't ask about their surgical status or body parts. Even if they're your friend, family member, just don't ask about it. This includes whether they've had bottom or top surgery, what genitals they were born with. Many trans non-binary folk, this can be uncomfortable for them when you talk about their body parts, like talking about a trans man having breasts and referring to his chest as his breasts. It can be very triggering for them and harm their mental health. Don't ask to see pre-transition photos or what their birth or dead name was. Like I said, another thing, this can be very triggering for people. I have friends who are also trans or non-binary. I have no idea what their birth name was. And of course, I'm curious, just like any other person would be curious, but I don't ask because that's not my place. If they want to eventually tell me one day, I'll thank them for feeling like they were safe enough and comfortable enough to tell me that. But other than that, I don't bother asking about it. Never ask when someone became transgender. You don't become transgender. It's like how people ask when someone became gay. You don't become gay, you don't become transgender. It's just who you are. And don't ask them how they have sex. The same with people asking how lesbians and gay people have sex. It's weird. Don't do it. There's no reason you need to know unless you are going to be a sexual partner of that person. And then you need to have a respectful conversation with them about it. Rule of thumb is if it's weird to ask your cisgender friend the question, it's not okay to ask a trans or non-binary person that question. 5 positive ways to be an ally. Accept that people have the right to define their gender, regardless of assigned sex. Respect people's gender identifications, pronouns, and names. Challenge anti-trans and sexist remarks, jokes, and comments to personal conversations. Listen to stories of people who are trans and to better understand their experiences, and say that you're a trans ally and tell people why. So this is called the gender unicorn, and I think it's a very good way to visually understand concepts we've talked about, and to talk about these concepts with others, or even if you're cisgendered and heterosexual, heteromantic, it can still be something you can fill out. So to just get a better visual of who you are, you can just Google the gender unicorn and this will pop up. So we're back to our friend Felix. And so Felix uses he, they pronouns and identifies as agender. We will get to agender later, but agender usually means person doesn't feel as they have a gender. So we can see over here under gender identity, there's a mark next to other because Felix identifies as agender. So they express themselves both in a masculine and feminine way. We can see that under gender expression, Felix expresses themselves in a bit more of a masculine way than a feminine way, but definitely both ways. So he may mix both together or feel more masculine one day and more feminine the next. Next, we see sex assigned at birth. Felix is assigned female at birth, or AFAB, like I said earlier. And these physical attraction and emotional attraction have nothing to do with gender or the person's their own gender, but it is part of this. So I touched on it quick. So Felix is physically attracted to all genders, so he considers himself pansexual. You can see all the genders are marked underneath there. And they are emotionally attracted to women and other genders, so they consider themselves biromantic. We'll eventually have the How to Be an Ally topics will be a series, and we'll have a presentation that talks about the differences between pansexual and romantic attraction. As you can see, they're different here. So I got some answers from people within the trans non-binary community, asking them what their gender identity means from them, as there are definitions of the gender identities, but the way someone defines it for themselves may be different. So we're going to start with demi-boy and demi-girl. The definition of demi-girl is a gender identity describing someone who's partially, but not wholly, identifies as female, girl, or otherwise feminine. The quote from someone who submitted one is, being a demi-girl means that I feel some connection with being female, but not entirely. So I consider myself partially female, but the rest of me is non-binary. I prefer using she, her, and they, them pronouns. I also changed my name to be something more gender neutral because it is more comfortable for me. Demi-boy, on the other hand, is the opposite of that. It's someone whose gender identity describes themselves as partially, but not wholly, as a man, boy, or otherwise masculine. For me, demi-boy is only having the loosest connection to masculinity. I don't feel masculine in almost every way, but little things like attire and pronouns and stuff I have kept. It would be odd wearing other clothes. So pretty much only the superficial presentation aspects of gender. We already went over the definition of transgender, but we'll go over it again. So transgender is identifying as a gender that is not the one you were assigned at birth. I'm not the gender I was assumed to be. So under the transgender umbrella, there's trans masculine and trans feminine. I don't have a quote for trans feminine, but it's just going to be the opposite definition of trans masculine, or for short, trans masc. Is a term to describe transgender people who were assigned female at birth, who identify with masculinity to a greater extent than with femininity. Trans masc for me means identifying strongly with being masculine and presenting masculine, but not being a trans male. So on the other hand, trans feminine or trans femme is a term to describe transgender people who were assigned male at birth, but identify with femininity to a greater extent than masculinity. Genderqueer is an umbrella term similar to non-binary. This identity can include a combination of genders, neither man nor woman, moving between genders, those who do not and cannot place their gender, and having overlap or blurred lines between gender identity. So there's two quotes for this one. Identify with genderqueer because I'm a bit whatever about gender. I'm definitely outside the binary somewhere, but I can't really place exactly where. I can best describe my gender as someone shrugging at something. The next quote is, I love the term genderqueer because it really sparks how my gender feels. It's queer. My gender is gay, it's butch, it's campy, and other, and weird. My gender is radically opposed to the gender binary and is not interested in a sanitized ideal third gender category filled with perfectly androgynous skinny white people. Genderqueer is radically inclusive of all the weird gender that we queers express. It includes butches, sissies, and fairies, and drag performers, cross-dressers, transvestites, and yes, non-binary people too. Agender, which our friend Felix, who has been the example throughout this presentation, identifies as agender. Agender can either be non-binary gender identity or someone who does not feel they have a gender identity. The two quotes here are, it means I distance myself from being a man or a woman. I'm just me. I don't feel as if I am any gender. I feel like I'm a sort of nebulous being without any strong connections to being a man or a woman. Non-binary. Non-binary describes any gender identity which does not fit the male or female binary spectrum. Two quotes here. Non-binary. I am neither male or female, but I have a different gender outside the binary. To me, being non-binary is freeing yourself from the strict male-female binary that society tries to cram everyone in. If I try to put a specific label on my identity, then I'm just putting myself in another box, and that makes me feel trapped. Genderfluid and Genderflux. I'll describe the difference in more detail after both quotes, because they can be a bit confusing. So gender fluid is people who feel that their strength of their gender or genders changes over time. I don't stick to one gender all the time. Every morning I ask myself, am I a man, woman, neither? And go with whatever has the most positive response in my emotions. I don't present any different when I am in any gender mode, something that goes inside my head, something I need to know for myself. Gender flux, on the other hand, is gender intensity changes over time. My gender identity is fluid, flux, transmasc. I identify mostly as a man, but also somewhat as non-binary. My gender fluctuates between being masculine and androgynous. The intensity of my gender also fluctuates. So the difference here is gender fluid. So the strengths of someone's gender or genders might change over time, meaning they might move between feeling like a female and feeling male. They might feel super female for a couple of days and then not feel female another day and just feel kind of male. While on the other hand, gender flux is that intensity part. So someone might feel agender some days, but other days they feel like a demi boy, which is partially male, and then they might feel like a trans male other days. So how much they feel that gender changes over time. But with gender fluid, the genders they feel, which type they feel changes over time. So like the rest of the LGBT community, trans and non-binary people face hardships. So some of the hardships, I just found the new number for this from the telesummit we did today at 1 o'clock, but here it says according to the Human Rights Watch, as of April 2020, 22 states do not prohibit discrimination based on gender identity. So a lot of these numbers change throughout the year. Hopefully they're always changing for the better. This lack of protection can lead to unemployment and lead to poverty. Homelessness is also big among the LGBTQ plus community, and some shelters will not allow trans and non-binary folk in allowed to stay due to their gender identity. So like other parts of the LGBTQ plus community, transgender and non-binary folk suffer from harassment and stigma. So in 2019, Human Rights Watch said that advocates tracked 27 deaths of at least transgender or non-binary gender non-conforming people in the US due to fatal violence, majority of whom were Black and transgender women. Today for the telesummit, I mentioned the 2020 number. Within 7 months of 2020, 28 deaths or suspicious deaths of transgender people murders have been reported. So we've already outdone last year's whole number within 7 months this year. And during the times after the murder of George Floyd, numbers of murders against Black transgender women had risen. I don't know the exact number right now, but I know from the time of his murder, I've heard about 3 of them, of Black transgender women specifically being murdered. This year, also in June, Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act was rewritten, meaning that health providers and insurance companies that receive federal funding do not have to provide the same access to covered services and care to transgender people, meaning they can refuse them services. Health insurance providers do not have to cover medical transitions like they do other surgeries, which a lot of insurances were already not doing this, but now they legally don't have to. So these are just references I used. I appreciate everyone joining today. And like I said, there's going to be more talks about how to be an ally to different parts of the LGBTQ plus community. And if you have any questions, you can go to we.net and contact us, or you can directly contact the Human Rights team at humanrights@we.net. And thank you all for joining today. and have a good day.